Welcome back, everyone. My name is Kiana, and we are here for our afternoon session, Evolving a Company Culture in Ever-Changing Times. As the world changes rapidly around us, our organizations and our cultures are changing as well. Given the challenging nature of 2020, nationwide protests seeking to address systemic racism, a global pandemic forcing many of us to work from home, ever divisive political posturing leading up to a major election, how do we redefine our working environments and keep our cultures true to our organization's values? Well, this panel will discuss that and more. The moderator for this panel is Ben Callahan. Ben is the president of Sparkbox and founder of the Build Right Workshop series, and an author and speaker with a focus on building more flexible teams capable of building a more flexible web. Remember to submit your questions for the Q&A in the app. Then navigate to the home screen and click on Session Q&A and select this session. From there, you can submit your questions throughout the panel to the moderator. We would like to thank our title sponsors, Fifth Third Bank, Wright State Research Applied Research Corporation, the Entrepreneur Center, and our partner organizations, 937 Payroll. And up next, we'll have Jerica. Ben, take it away.
Thank you, Key. I know that I can speak for my fellow panelists and I when I say thank you so much for the opportunity to share some of the things that we're doing in our businesses and our cultures. I actually want to take just a moment quickly to invite Mike and Jackie to share a little bit about themselves, their businesses, the size of their organization, and maybe just a quick description of the culture. Jackie, would you start us off?
Sure. Thank you, Ben. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jackie Gamblin. I'm the CEO and founder of JYG Innovations. We are a local IT consulting firm who primarily supports the Department of Defense. We have about 150 people nationwide, probably in 6 or 7 states now. And really, I would describe our culture as really family oriented. I do actually have several family members that work within the business. We really try to have that family feel. It's about personal connection, about building relationships. Thanks, Ben.
Excellent. Mike?
Excellent. I'm Michael Martin. I'm the CIO of Smart Data. So we are basically all things software product development. So I've got around 100 software developers. We've been able to kind of reimagine our culture around a software developer. What would the perfect environment be for software development teams to flourish and work closely with their customers and deliver a lot of value? So we kind of threw away the playbook and we started over again and said, what's going to make us highly productive and transparent and be able to speed up delivery in a market that's really difficult to deliver software quickly and transparently to people who are non-developers. So we've really focused on that and made just a great environment for software developers to flourish and develop amazing products for our customers.
All right. Thank you, Mike and Jackie. I'm excited to chat with both of you today. So as Key mentioned, my name is Ben Callahan. I'm the president of Sparkbox. We're about 50 folks, mostly developers and designers. We were based in Ohio here in Dayton, in the Dayton area, but we also have some space in Pittsburgh, and we've got folks kind of throughout the U.S. From Colorado out to Vermont. So very remote at this point. Culturally, I would say we have sort of always been an organization where the individuals here are striving very hard to become better. And that sort of culture of learning is something that really permeates our organization. And we'll talk a little bit more about the values of our organizations here as we get going. But I want to just set the context for this discussion. And Key hit on a lot of these things when she gave that intro. But I'll just say, obviously, as many of you know, 2020 has been a whirlwind of a year. In March, Ohio went into quarantine along with most states in the U.S., obviously in response to the global pandemic. In May, George Floyd was killed by police in Minneapolis, and there were protests around the states. Obviously, we're in the midst of a pretty divisive political cycle. And what's wild about all of these things is that in some ways, I think we try to sort of create spaces where folks don't have to think about a lot of that stuff and where they can focus on their work. But the truth is that all the things that are happening outside of work impact our employees. They impact us. And therefore, they will change us. They will change our cultures. And so, especially in the context of, a world where we as organizations are trying to create more inclusive spaces with more diverse teams, that means we're going to have a lot of folks on our team with lots of different perspectives and wildly varying life experiences. And these kinds of things happening in the world will impact each of them differently. And so this is the context in which we're trying to make highly collaborative workplaces, right? Where we have lots of different voices, lots of different perspectives working tightly together. As Jackie said, almost like a family, right? Like really, truly working together. And we want, as Mike, as you said, we want to serve our clients well. So I would love to just take it quickly back to March, starting with the coronavirus. And I would love to hear from each of you. What was your sort of initial response when the news came out about this pandemic and about what that would mean for businesses who have physical locations? Mike, would you start us off kind of sharing how you all responded to that?
Yeah, so we were, I just gotten back from a trip and started following it kind of on the plane ride home, watching the news and saying, oh, this is something real to be paying attention to. So that next week I was back in the office and we started talking about it. And I typically wore this big beard. And I remember on that Thursday before we basically called off working from the office, I shaved it off. And people came in and looked at me and like, what is going on? I'm like, well, you can't wear a mask with a beard. So I'm taking it off. And they're like, is this for real? And I go, I think it is. And we've got to kind of plan for the worst case scenario and just be safe. So that Friday we kind of got together and said, okay, well, we're gonna just have everybody start working from home just for precaution. I mean, even if this is just a flu, I don't want my whole office getting a flu and getting sick all at one time. Let's just be real safe and careful there. And so what we did, what was really successful, is we just started a meeting every Thursday at 3:00. We still do it. We get together, we look at kind of the news from the state of Ohio. We look at what our customers needs, what our teams need, our families need, and say, how's everyone doing? Is there any, we distributed masks that way. We looked at when we're going to return to the office, and we're still not back in the office yet. The risk reward is just not there for us. And we've talked about the strategy. We know how we're going to go back and when we go back, but we just talk about it openly and said, I like to say, this is my first pandemic. I'll be a lot better on my second pandemic, but for this first one, I'm just making it up as we go along, and I'm real transparent with everybody, and we're open about ideas and sharing. So it took a minute to get everyone's thinking to really change. When I shaved my beard off, I think that kind of jolted a lot of people into, oh, this is for real. Something major is happening. And now we're just kind of sharing and making up the plan as we go along as a team.
Mike, was your team, are all of your employees in this area, or do you have remote folks as well?
So the 100 software developers we have here are Dayton, Columbus, Texas, Louisville. The majority are right here in the Miami Valley, but we do have some sprinkled all over the United States and a few in Hyderabad. So it is kind of global. We had a few employees who were international that got stranded. So we kind of checked in with those guys, let them know like, hey, do what you need to do. If you're working off hours, that's great. If you need not to work, that's great too. I just kind of kept tabs with them, the plans. There's some pretty extraordinary stories out there of people trying to get back to Ohio from all around the globe as things locked down and requirements kept changing to get people home. So we work with those people, provided updates to the rest of their teams and colleagues, just so people kind of know what's going on.
That's great. So a lot of communication, even weekly meetings.
Yes.
That's great. Okay, Jackie, how did you all respond?
We were actually very similar to Mike in terms of our local office, our back office support, our headquarters here in Dayton, Ohio. We shut down immediately that Friday as well. We are still, remote for the same reasons, just better to be safe. But one of our challenges, we have several people. That's probably 15% of our employees are here in our local office, and the rest are at a customer site. So we really had to manage the logistics of what those individual locations were being directed to do. What was the policy? What was the procedure? Who stays? Who goes home? Who's able to telework? Who's not? Who's function? So we had a huge mixture where there were some who were in positions where they could not telework and were unable to work. So we had to come up with our decision on how we're going to make sure those people were okay. And, we were committed not to lay anyone off. The others, we had some who had to report to work and it was not an option. So making sure that they had everything that they needed. dealing with, just the mental health issues. This was a scary time. So you had people who either maybe schools started to close. That became a whole nother dynamic where people were trying to manage school schedules. And how we navigated is we actually came up with a daily we call it a sit rep. We're in the DoD. We always got to have a little acronym, right? So a situational report where we really use kind of the old phone tree where from our executives to our directors to our managers and project managers, because my concern was, I don't want someone to be home or remote and we don't know they're okay, right? Because no one's seeing them every day. So just to make sure there's some communication, it's just a thumbs up. Hey, all is well. So we're still doing that to this day. That we just keep this master, spreadsheet almost that really kind of tracks. So we know if everybody's all right, and also just things like if someone's just taking vacation, right? You don't want to panic and think something's wrong because someone just took some time off. But it's been a moving target, I think, and that's probably the challenge. For everyone. Everyone's situation is a little different. There's some unique situations that our HR has had to try to deal with and engage. But the key is just to be supportive. I mean, that's been our number one goal is how can we be supportive to our employees and also try to be responsive and supportive to our customers.
That's excellent. So it sounds like both of you started sort of an additional sort of type of check-in or communication. So Jackie had the daily. Was that something that gets sent out, or is that an actual meeting? Okay.
Yeah, it's for the project managers, if they have direct contact, they're usually talking to the people, but then the report is just populated, and then we just share that among our executive team so they can get a corporate overview of everyone. Nice.
Okay, excellent. And then Mike, we did something similar to you where we have our organization already has sort of a monthly, we just an all hands where my business partner and I, Rob Har, will sit down and just do a big call with everybody, and we just tell them what's going on. Some financial overviews. We talk a little bit about some values. We share exciting things that are happening, difficult things, and we sort of took that model and just made it weekly for a short season there. Because there was just so much unknown. And I think that. What I hear Mike saying a lot is transparency. Just the idea that we want to make sure folks know what's happening, and I think all three of us probably could agree that if you're not being clear about things, people will make up stories in their heads, right? Like this is just how humans work, I think. Mm-hmm. So do either of you have thoughts around sort of transparency and how that played into this? Was that a key factor or something you were focused on?
I think for me it just fits into the culture. That's how we operate. And really the challenge I could say for me is that, I like to go out and visit. I visit every one of our sites at least on a quarterly basis. So I'm doing this face-to-face interaction, where we're having kind of our mini all hands meetings for those sites, and to lose that. So a lot of people we're used to hearing from us, and actually talking to us. And so, starting to use more WebEx, of course, because, right, you really are trying to get that face-to-face, interaction as much as you can.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Jackie, I love the idea. This is not something that I had thought for us to discuss, but I love the idea that how you're handling your organization and your culture before an emergency happens actually helps you sort of establish the trust that you need maybe to handle it well in the midst of a challenge, So this is not something that you just respond to. You have to be a little bit more proactive.
Ben, could I share one more small nugget that ties to that is our back office, we actually had started where we were allowing telework 2 days a week. And it was something we had kind of played with the past year. As a quality of life benefit, right? And, we kind of first, let's see how it works. Let's make sure we're getting things done. So it really, having no idea that, all these things we had worked through to establish that would come into play, because of a pandemic.
Yeah, good timing, I guess. We actually have our first question submitted here. So I'll just read this. And if one of you has some thoughts, it's right on topic with what we're discussing now. So I think we'll just incorporate it right into the conversation. It says, in your experience, what's the best way for a leader to be proactive in acknowledging and addressing social and economic issues in the world with their staff? And so beyond sort of this regular cadence of communication, was there sort of a moment where each of you as leaders in the organization felt like you needed specifically to address the organization or your team? And how did that look?
I can remember distinctly one Monday morning, kind of all staff check-in we had when lots of things were happening in the news. And I thought back to, and I told this story to my staff. I had a big corporate job, a couple jobs before, and there was something similar that happened in Beaver Creek, and we were out there protesting. And I remember standing there with just this collection of people who were passionate about seeing change, and we were holding signs, and the news cameras fired up. And the first thought that went through my head is, oh, is this going to affect my job? Am I going to get in trouble? And so I told them this story, and I go, I want to let every single person know here you're safe. If you're out there and you're representing your beliefs, I'm not here to judge your beliefs, but we're here to support that you have that right to do that. That's something important to you. If you want to get involved in elections or protests, if you're serving on a jury and you need to go do that, like there's all these different avenues we can have our voice kind of heard. And as a company, we support you putting your voice out there. So if you end up in the newspaper or whatnot, as long as you're not committing a crime or anything like that, we're 100% behind your ability to do that, and we support you. And also we offered, if you need to take a few days off to deal with family issues from COVID or the protests and all the things that are going on, we're going to allow you to do that too. So we really made space for people to kind of do that and made sure they felt safe, that if they needed to go out there and express themselves, that we supported their right to do that.
That's awesome. I appreciate you sharing that, Mike. Which actually kind of leads us well into the next section. So we're in March, April, coronavirus is happening. All of us are sort of essentially working from home at this point, mostly, other than, essential workers, where it's possible, we're working from home. And I would say in April, we started to notice that sort of sense of isolation, with our folks. And I felt that, I'm a very extroverted person. And so for me, sitting at home, trying to figure out how to get my work done with no, like energy around me, just me and other than my kids running around, just me, here trying to work was really hard for me. And not only that, no coffee shops to go to, no place where I could go out in public to work. And I think you take that, so there's this growing sense of isolation and just unknowing what's happening, and then all of a sudden we have, all the stuff happening in Minneapolis with George Floyd being killed. And I think this just added another layer, right? We've already got isolation. And I would love to hear, as the Black Lives Matter movement really picked up, as protests really started to happen around in cities, even here, happened. And in cities where your employees maybe live, what did you do to support specifically people of color on your team struggling through such a tense time and really a time of fear in the midst of such isolation?
I'll jump in, as an African-American female that was born in Selma, Alabama. My mother was from Lynette, Alabama. So, social justice, civil unrest, racism are not new topics, right? So one of the things that I try to make an effort to do, and we have a very diverse company, is really just, we keep talking about transparency, but I think the next thing is it's really a level of vulnerability and openness. So I actually, shared some personal experiences that I had not shared in the past, because I think, I can just say for me and how I was raised, you've learned that, you change what you can and you push through, right? So there's a lot of things that you just kind of have to swallow because you don't feel that you can change it, and you get through it. I know from my leadership team, many have had different experiences, right? So it's just that openness of saying, wow, I was had someone share on a board I was on about their daughter who was, in high school and really kind of getting behind some of the social justice issues and just not understanding it and saying, hey, I've never was raised that way. I don't understand why people think certain ways. And she was saying, having to have that tough conversation with her daughter, and I shared that, I had to have that conversation with my daughter when she was 5 years old because of an incident. And so, it's just different perspectives, and it was hard, and I'm normally not one to open up about that, again, but I didn't realize until afterwards, because the responses that I received from peers and coworkers, it was meaningful, and I said, I need to probably be a little more open. I think it's about communication for all of us, so just seeing other people's perspectives and experiences, and just approaching it from a perspective of understanding.
Yeah, thanks, Jackie. I'm sure those personal stories, like having your employees, the folks on your team see sort of the real you, I think can be tremendously powerful. And so that takes a lot of bravery. So I commend you for having the guts to do that. Mike, how did you all respond?
So stories are making it personal, and having stories and just having open dialogue and conversations about things that people have been a part of or personally experienced was really huge. Now, we're a flat organization. I don't have any directors or managers. So everyone's sort of leaders, right? So somebody says, well, we need an architect or we need a director. I'm like, well, I'm not demoting all these people. They're too talented. So we can't have one. But they're all leaders in that respect. And I put this out there to them. If you see anything that feels wrong, racist or sexist, or just isn't who we are, you are all required to take action. You're pull that person aside and say, do you understand what that meant or what that felt or what I heard? And sometimes it's just a perspective, like, oh, I wasn't even thinking that way. Oh my goodness. And then that's all it takes. And then suddenly you've stopped a pattern from even starting. But if it is something that can't be dealt with, or you're feeling like you didn't get the traction you needed, then you're required to pull me in there and let's talk about it and let's deal with it directly. The only way as an organization we stay on top of these things is just open communication and responsibility. We're all responsible to be listening and looking for things that are not who we are and not the culture we want to be part of, and stopping it dead in its tracks. I don't care who's in the conversation or what's going on. You can't look past it. You can't let it slide.
That's great. Yeah. We have another comment and question that's come in that ties right in. So we'll go ahead with this. I'll just read: vulnerability and transparency are great. How much should a leader share in efforts of connecting with their team and in building culture? So I think maybe the implication behind this is, it's wonderful for you to be transparent, but is there a way to share too much, maybe, and like, how do you know where that line is? So either of you have thoughts on that?
I think it's about authenticity, right? I mean, depending on your company, I mean, I think my people who work for us, they have a sense of who I am, and it's that consistency, right? So if it's from an authentic place, and you're always professional, you're always respectful. I mean, there's always a way that you have to go about it. But I think as long as you're willing to do that and just be your true self, I don't know if there's really a hard line. I mean, I think you just have to know your audience, of course. I mean, there are things that I share, at our executive leadership level. We're talking because it's a safe place, right? That you may not go and say, okay, hey, we're going to go tell everybody out in the field, your story. But I think there has to be, people have to feel safe and respected. And so for me, it's just about being authentic.
Yeah, that makes a
So
lot of
we're
sense.
taking some pretty dramatic experiments in this space. So I have a rule: unless it's required by an NDA not to disclose, or you tell me in the beginning of the conversation that this is confidential, I don't want you sharing it, it's pretty much an open book. We talk about numbers, we talk about performance. If it's a negative thing about an individual, that happens immediately afterwards in private. I don't try to call people out in a group setting if I think they're going to feel attacked or personally caught off guard by something. But we have very frank and open conversations, good news, bad news. It startles people because you start hearing the guy who's doing benefits start talking about the benefits process and negotiating. They're like, oh my God, are our benefits in trouble? I'm like, no, this happens in every single company. It's just happening behind closed doors. So you kind of got to get used to hearing of a lot more and kind of getting a better filter about what's important to you and what's not. But if you are excited about benefits, or you are excited about figuring out clients that are slow paying and figuring out ways to get them to pay on time, like, you can go gravitate over there and learn more about the accounting system or the benefit system. But when you first land that first year in an open environment, it's scary because you're hearing all this stuff that you've never heard before. And we just, overshare and let people kind of develop their filters. But that first year, I think, is kind of scary for new people.
Yeah, that's great, Mike. We're similar, in terms of the amount of transparency that we have as an organization. I think one of the things that we've learned is it has to come with education, right? So
Mhm.
I can share all this information about the finances of the business, but you also need to have some context. You need to understand, what does that actually mean? And
Mhm.
so we use those sort of all hands, we call them coffee hours, but that opportunity for us where Rob and I, my partner and I, are addressing the entire organization. We'll weave in a little bit of information about the finances, but also a little bit of maybe a little teaching around how to actually interpret those numbers. And so I think those two make a good pair, transparency with education. At least that's what we found. um, are there specific things that you've changed culturally, values or new benefits or anything like that, to better support your employees through what has been a wild year so far?
Mm, I think for us, I mean, we're always trying to figure out what can we add, right? What else can we provide for our employees? Especially, you listen to what other companies are doing, and you're like, man, that sounds great. Yeah, so one thing the timing seemed weird. So our we offer short-term, long-term disability, and we also offer life insurance that the company pays for all our employees. So our life insurance company came and said, hey, there's an ability for your companies, because I think now they get one times their salary up to 150 or something in life insurance. They said, hey, they can add some additional life insurance, right, for a small fee. And I'm like, wow, do I bring this up during a pandemic? But in the spirit of how we always operate, and it was about that time, so we did. And I mean, and people jumped on it, and just looking at more education in terms of our 401k, right? Because again, these are scary times. People are worried about their investments, and I think you just hit on it, is that information with education. So we're always trying to figure out how can we educate our employees better in terms of their own professional development and their families and their own personal lives. So
Yeah, that's great. That sort of, we had several moments like this, Jackie, where we're in the midst of what feels like just massively challenging times. We know that our employees are struggling, and we have something sort of like mundane to share, or something that's just like, yeah, like you mentioned, an addition to the benefits that's really not kind of related in a lot, and it just felt inappropriate almost.
mhm.
I know that we sort of immediately paused all of our social stuff, just because it felt like we needed to make space for a more important conversation. Did you all do that? Did you feel like you needed to explain that to your employees, or how did that go?
Mike, you and I, one thing for us, we normally have gatherings, and so that, again, the pandemic really kind of brought that to an end. But one great part is we had just celebrated our 10-year anniversary and had a big gala in January. So it really was a celebration across the company, and I'm kind of like, wow, I'm kind of glad we did that, because it just gave us something, that we're not going to get to do this year. Normally I have, 6 holiday parties and, picnics and all this, but none of that, we'll be able to gather like that. So
Yeah.
yeah, there is a loss there.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did a virtual cookout. So everybody had a cookout at their house, and then we ate in front of our screens and chit-chatted. Technology definitely has not caught up into that realm that you need to have these little one-off conversations with people in the audio system. But we did that, and then we were very much work-life balance to us meant you start at 8 and you finish at 5. And that's it. You don't touch your keyboard. Very rarely do we work over the weekends or after hours. That's the work-life balance we kind of struck, and that was the kind of deal we had. But we've thrown out the window. Now people are teaching their kids, and they've got to shift hours. And we said, you know what, get your hours in whenever and however you can. And that really core to us is teams working together, but we've had to really flex and kind of just change and adapt to that. So we've kind of, whenever, if you work on the weekend, if you get up early, do your best, and we'll deal with it.
Yeah, we've taken a similar approach, in terms of flexibility with hours. In fact, that's just sort of how we've always been wired. Is, we're not requiring people to be any place at any given time unless there's a meeting schedule. So that has been I think a big help for folks. But our job through these seasons has really been about letting people know that that's for real. I think you can announce a policy around flexibility. Hey, just get your work done. But there's still sort of that kind of built-in expectation. I'm going to work, 8 to 5 or 9 to 5, whatever the hours are, So I think we were very intentional reaching out to folks and saying, hey, like, this is for real. You can get your work done when you need to. We have a lot of young families, so we have kids running around, and trying to do the school from home thing. And yeah, it's challenging to fit stuff in the middle of the day sometimes. So we encouraged folks to take that. Another thing that we did that I was super excited, my business partner found this amazing benefit for our team, which essentially provides up to 40 free therapy sessions for our employees, but also for the adults in their household. So I think it's 13 or older, teenagers and older. And so that has been just a huge, like to allow folks to have sort of that kind of outlet. And I think, we don't really have, we don't have that in-house, right? Like, I don't have a therapist I can send people to. And that's really not the role of our directors, but we're good listeners. And so we try to do that. But when folks are struggling with the kinds of issues that have been brought up this year, I think having that kind of benefit where they know they have that support outside of the workplace too can be really helpful, and not just for them, but for their family, as well. So that's been really helpful, I think, for us. We have a couple more questions here. So here's one that I would love to hear your thoughts on. It says, we've seen people fired for racist actions off the clock. Do you need to write policy to make it clear these attitudes aren't acceptable and will be addressed? Either of you?
Well, I think we addressed them already in our handbook. That was some of that open conversation, is just reminding people, that, you represent, the company, and, we believe in freedom of speech, but we believe in being respectful, right? So you don't want anyone that you feel like, because anything that borders on harassment, threats, there's just, there's, all this legal language that we're covered. And we actually had our handbook reviewed by our attorney, because I wanted to make sure, to be quite honest, if someone were to do something, that we had recourse, because that was a concern, and it came up in some of our meetings, that people said, hey, and I just tell people, be careful, no one's inside your home, no one's trying to, but just be smart. Everyone is entitled to their opinion, but, we saw some crazy things happening on social media. Everybody did. And it's like, wow,
Yep.
What were they thinking? So.
Right. Mike, any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, it's just there's a feeling sometimes when you're online that you're anonymous, and that's as far from the case. You can get into these strange arguments with strangers, and it's just not worth it. So I think for us, we work really close with people. We want to really get to know who they are. And if you're trying to live a double life, you're one person at work and you're somebody else outside of work, you're not going to keep that up. That's going to show and leak through. And we hired, you as a real individual, and all of your actions is a sum of who you are. And that's how we're going to judge you. And that's the lens we judge you through. And what's acceptable. We've talked about that. I've said it once in a meeting, and someone pulled me aside and said, you shouldn't say that out loud. And I go, in the meeting, I said, if anyone is racist or sexist or anything like that, fire them on the spot, and then come tell me you fired them. And they're like, what? I can fire somebody? Yeah, you can. I'll back you up on it. And they're like, you probably shouldn't tell people that. And I was like, well, if it's true, then they were in the rights, and I'll stand them and I'll back them up 100% of the time. It's just, it's silly, some of the stuff that people get talking about on the internet and go down these silly rabbit holes of why are we doing that? It doesn't make any sense to me. Talk to real humans. I'm not going to win somebody's opinion or argument online. It's better to walk up and have a conversation with them and learn about, where their perspective is and who they are as a human being. Like, we treat people face to face for a reason. You got eyebrows, you got the inflection of voice and body language, but when you're just seeing little text go back and forth on a screen, it dehumanizes people and it brings out the worst in people. So even internal communication, I'll see kind of going off the rails, and I'll just stop, guys, let's get on a Zoom call or whatever, and let's just talk about it. And immediately the tone and inflection completely changes. it humanizes the situation, and people, it brings out a much better situation with people. And that's the way to have discourse and disagreement, I think, is face-to-face communication. And that's something we model a lot. We do peer reviews and other things where you have to, as a human being, say uncomfortable things to another human being that you care about and you need to be successful. And you need to learn how to do that. And I think that's missing a lot in our society, where it just goes from 0 to 100 on the anger scale, when really you might be able to change that person's opinion or get them to see a new perspective by just asking a few questions and humanizing the conversation. And I think we're really missing that right now.
Yeah, that's great. I love the sort of connection to, even though all three of us are operating in a very technical space, remembering that it's humans that are using the stuff we build. It's humans that we're serving, right? Our clients, and their customers. And that's, I would say, probably a thread through every single one of our values, our core values and our entry-level values. We actually have a question here that totally ties in. So let me bring this in as we're continuing this. It says, as the world is changing for better and for worse, is being more humanistic also beneficial to productivity and growth of your organization? I know for me, at least, I would say there are probably ways to be more productive, right? But I would say for the growth of the organization, for the health of the organization, absolutely. How do you two feel about this?
I couldn't agree more, Ben. I think you summed it up well.
Yeah, we talk about a sustainable pace. So we don't want to rev up to this hyper-productive situation and then try to deal with this up and down notion. We want to be sustainable, that you feel, that you did a good week's work, and then you're ready for the next week's work. If you feel like you just totally spent yourself in the last few weeks or last month, something's broken in the organization. We're doing something wrong. We want to have this sustainable, healthy place where you can reflect and grow as an individual. So finding that balance is what's important for us.
Yeah, excellent. Well said. Okay, so let's think a little bit about the coming months, because we are rapidly approaching a very interesting political season here. And I remember in 2016, I don't think that I was really prepared for how that election would impact my employees in wildly different ways, And so I'm wondering, I'm thinking a little bit now about, and our team of directors are thinking a lot about this, and I'm just wondering how you all handle sort of politics in the workplace. Do you allow for that kind of conversation and discourse? Do you encourage it? Do you say, hey, let's keep that away from the conversation here at work? How do you handle that?
Well, I can tell you, it's, we have two different environments. We have our office environment where it's internal personnel only. People who work closely together. Most of them are, again, like I said, are indirect personnel, that they're not billable, working at a customer site. And then we have folks who are, working most of them at a military installation. And there are rules and guidelines and things that they have to adhere to. And it's, so it's a culture within a culture, right? So, we have to make sure that people understand that. And that's one of the things, that especially for people who have not worked in a military environment, to understand, at the end of the day, there is the commander in chief, right? And the photo hangs on the wall. And so, everyone's entitled to their opinion. And what's difficult is, as we're industry or contractors, you may hear things from military personnel and government personnel that just because they say things doesn't mean that you can. Because there are different repercussions, different guidelines. So we really, I can tell you with the recent events, with my senior team, and there are 6 of us, I actually, I'd never done this before, asked them all to watch the movie 13th, if you haven't heard of it. So, and it really talks about the kind of a perspective on the history of the 13th Amendment. Because I thought it was a good talking point. And we had different views and different reactions, but it was just kind of, we can't just walk around and pretend like things aren't going on for people who are making decisions and in leadership positions, and whose voices, your feelings and voices are going to be heard one way or the other, right? So I just really wanted us to kind of just lay it on the table and just talk about it. And we had all different perspectives, but it was a healthy conversation. Even whether we agreed or disagreed, it was a healthy conversation. And I think it really offers some insight. And that's really what I encourage, even anyone within our company. If you can have a healthy conversation, some of those you cannot have at our customer site. It's just that simple, So, and again, I'm like Mike. As long as you're doing it in the right way, I'm going to support you. I'm going to support you 100%.
Yeah, what an interesting added challenge with, folks being on site in the context of like the military. I think that adds a whole nother dynamic that you have to think about, Jackie. That's challenging. Mike, what about you all?
We definitely have people on all sides. So as long as you're not campaigning in the office, we let adults have adult conversations and encourage, deep thought like that. And where I step in is just to remind people, no matter what the media says, like it's all stakes and the world's going to end if the wrong thing happens on the election day. This democracy has lasted for quite a long time. It's got checks and balances. And even last election, they said this is going to happen and that's going to happen. And we're all still here. Our lives have changed, but not exactly directly the way the media said it would change. So I just take a breath. Each person has something good and something bad. There is no pure evil person and pure good person, no matter how divisive the language is in the media. No matter who wins, we're going to be okay. And what really matters is our local stuff here. Like the national stuff we get all whipped up about and all excited about, but what are you doing with your county? What are you doing with your city, your state, those sorts of things? I hear a lot of national attention, but what really affects us more sometimes is the local stuff. And serving on a jury, I'm a big advocate for, when you get that jury duty, don't slide that. Go there and represent your community, and participate in politics and put your voice out there. But no matter who wins, just take a breath. The world continues and everything keeps going on. It's not as divisive and as important as the media makes you think it is. There's a lot more things here locally that I think are just as important that we overlook sometimes. And every time I talk to somebody way right or way left, if we just talk as people, we have so much in common. Like my most Republican staff member, my most liberal staff member, or Democrat staff member could be on the same team, and they agree on 80% of the things out there. Mm-hmm. So don't fall into this divisive political landscape. We're just people, and we're all trying to do the best we can for each other, I think.
Yeah, focus in on the things that we do have in common. I kind of hear you saying. Yeah, one of the things, Jackie, you mentioned a movie, sharing that with some of the folks on your team. I love this idea of sort of finding, items from culture or video, audio articles that are, or books, that are from our culture that might have interesting perspectives or different perspectives than the folks on the team have. I feel really fortunate. There's a couple of young folks on our team who are very passionate about this stuff, and they have started on their own a little group with my partner and I and a few other folks on the team to just say, hey, here's a structured conversation that we're going to have where we have a chance to like dive in and understand. In this case, it's about racism and like microaggressions and a lot of things like that it's really about, they've created a space that is incredibly welcoming, incredibly safe to discuss difficult things. And I think it's really been, I've learned a ton, in those conversations. And I think that's an area where I'm really interested to see how we can use artifacts from our culture to like help encourage healthy conversation and provide unique perspectives to folks who maybe haven't done that work to find those perspectives on their own. So that's an interesting call out, Jackie. I'm glad you brought that up. Let's see. We have only a moment or two left. Is there anything that we haven't touched on that one of you really feels we should have covered?
Well, being that it's focused on startups, is I see a lot of people mimicking the culture they think they're supposed to have, right? You see this TV corporate culture. You've had a bunch of big corporate jobs and you're a smaller startup and you're trying to legitimize yourself. So you run out and you try to implement a bunch of HR policies and treat people like employees. And that's the exact opposite thing you should do. Your culture is your strategic advantage. You're small, you're nimble. You can offer, maybe everybody goes on a ski trip every winter and you guys all hang out and for 2 weeks go skiing, or you go to the beach, or you let people have super flexible work. They want to travel South America and be able to work for you on a 9 to 5 schedule and you figure out a way to do that. Like when you're small and nimble, your culture is what gives you that strategic advantage. Don't take that for granted. Don't go try to copy some awful culture. You'll never be better than them if you're copying who they are. So really think strategically about your culture and your people and what you have to offer, and take advantage of that and utilize that.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. I love the idea of sort of defining who you are, your values, and allowing your benefits and programs to sort of stem from that, right? Instead of starting with the benefit and trying to work back in. Yeah. Jackie, any final thoughts?
No, it's just kind of maybe to piggyback a little bit on Mike. I always say, you have to define success for yourself. And again, don't let anyone else define what being successful means. I think a lot of people, get caught up in numbers, revenue or number of employees, or and again, those things, if that's not how you define success, that's not how we define success. We do not operate under the premise of a revenue goal going in, and because I've always said it's about how we do things, not how much money we make, or, because that doesn't mean you're successful, right? There are a lot of very rich companies that I would never want to be like. So
That's right.
So I just think everyone just needs to make sure when they go into it, they keep that in mind, and agree with what Mike said as well.
Yeah. Well, I just want to thank you both for your wonderful insight. Thank you both for creating companies and cultures where I'm sure folks recognize the value that you're offering them as whole human beings, not just as like a little sliver of their brain that you need to do some billable work. I think that's huge, and I love that this is happening. Here in our town, there are great companies to work for like yours. So thanks for your time and your sharing your thoughts. I think we'll have to wrap it up.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
And before you guys log off, I just wanted to say thank you all three of you, for just your insights, for your leadership. This seems very inclusive, and just for this really important conversation, especially now in the times that we're in. We need to hear more leaders having these type of conversations and letting their employees know that it's okay to be human and to feel and to have opinions, but to be respectful. So thank you so much for this amazing conversation. And for all of the audience who are still on board, thank you for joining. We hope that you received a lot of value out of the conversation that was had, and can even take it back to your leaders to maybe start having these open dialogues about, the realness of what's going on in the world. So please take a break and then join us at 3:00 for our next session, a fireside chat with Jerica Hoskins, founder of our Carney Coil Care. And so thank you again, and enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.